I would describe myself as someone who's interested in life. If I meet somebody who I've not met before, I like to hear the things that they have done or the things that they know and ask questions and just enjoy their story.
So this must feel really unnatural to you to tell your own story today, since you love to ask other people about theirs.
I hope it is. My name is Maggie Seideman, and I'm 80 years old. And right now I'm retired, but throughout life my occupation was a registered nurse. When I was in third grade, the teacher went around the room and asked us what we wanted to be when we grew up. I had never been in a hospital, and I said I wanted to be a nurse. I have no idea where that came from, but it stuck with me. And the night before I went into nursing school, Dr. Kildare was on TV, if you remember. I thought to myself, tomorrow I'm going to be doing that. It's crazy how things kind of come and go. I think I became a nurse because I was interested in science and I liked math. In fact, shortly after I got into nursing school, we had a rabbi because Mount Sinai was Jewish hospital, which is another thing that I appreciate. I had no idea when I decided to go there that it was a Jewish hospital. And I just thought for 3 years I was a little bit Jewish. And that makes you a little more open to learning other cultures and other people's thoughts. So he asked me, he said, how come you want to be a nurse? How come you're not a math teacher? And I thought right away, I made a mistake. Now I'm in nursing school, and he thinks I should be a math teacher. There weren't a lot of options, back then. For us, we were either teachers or nurses or secretaries or housewives. But anyway, I like nursing, and I think I'm drawn to it because of being able to help people, and yet there's a strong science side of it that I enjoy because you're constantly learning. Back when I was in nursing school, it was just medical and surgical nursing. And I started the cardiac and pulmonary rehab and wellness program at our hospital, St. Joseph's Community Hospital at the time. Before that, I spent, I think it was 14 years in the intensive care unit, working as an ICU nurse. Those were the days when I always think medicine was really developing. When I started out, it was pretty basic. We didn't have a lot of specialties, and my whole working story is I worked for a year. I took a little time off and had my first child, and then I went back to work for a few years, and my husband worked in the engineering department at the West Bend Company, the West Bend Company that made pots and pans. And he came home one day and said he didn't want to work indoors anymore. He wanted to go farming, and it blew me away. I thought, I grew up on a farm. I didn't want to marry a farmer. That was always my thought as a teenager. And it took me a couple of weeks, and I was driving to work one day, and I thought, I couldn't go to work every day and not like what I was doing. I can't expect him to. So I went home that night because I was working second shift. We had 2 kids at that point. And I said, okay, let's go farming. And so he went out and, looked around for a farm. His dad was wanting someone to take over the family farm, so we thought we would do that. And we bought the machinery and the cattle. And after about 6 months, my husband said, this is not going to work. So we will go out and buy our own place, which we did. And then I quit work for 9 years. I always took a class at the university in Sheboygan, one class a year on usually cardiac stuff, because my last years that I worked at St. Alphonsus in Port Washington, they had sent me and another gal down to one of the Milwaukee hospitals to see how their intensive care unit was set up. So came back and set up the first intensive care unit, so to speak, at St. Alphonsus in Port before I left to go farming. Those 9 years of farming is the perfect place to raise kids. They learned to work. They learned that when the work was there, you had to do it, and you could play later. So after about 9 years, I was in the car riding with some friends from my church at the time, and one gal's daughter was head of the intensive care unit at St. Joseph's Hospital in West Bend. And she said to me, "Maggie, do you ever think about going back to work? My daughter really needs help." And so I didn't say anything. And one day I was driving in West Bend, and I thought, well, why don't I stop and see? So I stopped at the hospital, and I thought, they're not going to want me. I've been out of nursing for 9 years, and filled out an application. And the gal said, well, wait right here. And a couple minutes later, she came back and said, the director would like to see you. And so I'm like, okay. And I went in her office, and she looked at me, and she said, can you start on Monday? This was a Thursday. I truly remember that. And I thought, oh, my goodness, my husband doesn't even know I'm here. So I said, well, can I call my husband? And she said, sure. So I called him from her office, and he said, okay, if that's what you want to do. So I did. And orientation was on Monday. In the morning, they told me all about the hospital and their expectations. They asked me to do 3 different procedures, and I did it. And they said, okay, go back to ICU. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Now this is, 50 years ago, so that's a while. And they were really busy back there. And so nobody could orientate me back there. They just said, oh, go take care of that patient. And I'm like, golly gee, okay. I went in the room. I knew enough about it that it wasn't totally strange, but I needed to take the temperature, pulse, and respirations. And so I go in the room, and where's the thermometer? When I left, we had thermometers in alcohol at the bedside, and now they have this thing that you stick in your ear. I thought, oh my goodness, I don't even know how to work the thermometer. Thank goodness I know how to read heart monitors. Anyway, it was just, it's interesting when I look back at that. And then I continued to learn and do, and like you do in any occupation, it just evolves. Toward the end, physical therapy had started a cardiac rehab program at the hospital. And one of the doctors asked me to once a week do an education class for them. And when I saw what they were doing, it was a physical therapist and a patient on a treadmill who had had a heart attack or bypass surgery. I said to the doctor, I said, no, that's not right. I said, they need to be monitored while they're exercising. And he said, well, write up a program. And so I wrote up a program, and I presented it to him, and he said, go for it. And so I started the cardiac, and then 5 years later, the pulmonary rehab programs at St. Joe's Hospital. And we also did diabetic exercise and education, too. So it just kind of unfurled from one thing into the next. It's interesting because when my daughter would be with me in the grocery store, sometimes she would get annoyed because I'd meet some of my patients or people that had been my patients in the grocery store, and they'd be, "Is this okay for me to eat? Is this okay for me to eat?" And she said, "We can't grocery shop and just grocery shop. We have to tour the store." I was always a pretty independent person, even as a teenager. I was the youngest of three, and my brother was disabled. He couldn't talk, and he didn't walk until he was about 5 or 6. He couldn't feed himself or dress himself. And so 11 months later, my sister was born. And then 16 months later, I was born. So my mother had her hands full with taking care of my brother, for one thing, and then my sister so closely behind that I always felt I kind of raised myself. Certainly not as a child, but once I got to the preteen, teenage years, I always kind of figured out myself what I needed to do and then do it. So I think that way I learned to think independently. And so I didn't, I guess I rarely went with the crowd just because that's what you did. I was a shy person when I was in school, all the way through, probably, I think cardiac rehab program is the one that got me out to meet people. When you're in a hospital setting and taking care of one-on-one patients, that's your assignment, so to say, and you care about what you're doing with that, but it's something you need to do because of a certain diagnosis. When it came to cardiac and pulmonary, you were meeting new people every day, and that got me out to be interested in people's lives and to seek out what they had to offer, besides the fact that they were there for what we had to give. We would have 6 or 7 cardiac patients in a group, and we would have a group every hour and a half or 2. And I was concerned about the one group we had was mostly guys, and they were very outspoken. And we had a fellow whose time period that he had to give to cardiac rehab was that time when this class was going on. So he would have to come into this class. And he was pretty shy, and I didn't know how that would go over. And so I was concerned about him, and that group of guys just took him in like I would never have believed they would have done. And that sticks out in my mind. I know there's other times when, you would get people who would be scared because of their diagnosis. We took him in and tried to reassure him. But when somebody going through the same situation as they are is taking them in and encouraging them, they just seem to melt and be able to feel comfortable. I grew up on a farm. My dad never bought a piece of machinery that didn't take 4 of us to operate because he wanted us all to be busy. So we grew up not going to the swimming pool or hanging out with friends. We didn't see our friends, our school friends, all summer long. We would be working in the field. Even when we were very young, we would be shocking oats or flax or baling hay or hauling hay in loose. It was a lot of hard work. It was hot, too, in the summertime. Our reward was one year we got $0.25 a week. That was our allowance. I think that was the only year we got an allowance. So things must have got harder after that for them. We didn't know any different. That's just what we did in the summertime. Later, a little bit later, probably when I was about 13 or 14, my dad said he was going to get a baler for the hay, and we were so excited. Well, that baler wasn't like everybody else's baler. Everybody else's baler, the hay would come into the baler and kick it out on its own up into the wagon. This baler, oh goodness, somebody drove the tractor. My sister usually drove the tractor. My dad sat on one side of the chute of the baler and my mother on the other side. And he had to put a shuttle in every so often and stick wires through. And then usually I was up on the wagon. And these bales weighed 50, 60 pounds. And I would get the bale and stack them on the wagon. And it's like, wow, that wasn't like everybody else's baler, that's for sure. I guess it was a baler. But our farm was a reasonable farm. It was in my dad's family. His grandparents came from Germany, and they got this piece of land. And they built the barn, and they built the house. My grandfather died at 42 from a heart attack. And my dad, one of 11, and he was a quiet kind of man. He worked hard for the simple life. And my mother was from South Milwaukee. They met at a dance at the Eagles Club in Milwaukee. They liked to dance. So she was, I guess, of the two, the more progressive person. She was the one that encouraged us to take accordion lessons and join 4-H and just find unique things. I guess my mother is who I looked up to because she was a hard worker and she had a lot to do. Dennis and I met when I was 16 and he was 17. My mother and dad liked to go to dances. And so they started taking my sister and I. There were a lot of local public dances back then. And of course, you meet a couple guys or whatever. So I was on a date with one guy. He also had met one of my friends from school. We went out on Saturday night, and on Sunday was my friend's birthday. She turned 16. And then the next day at school, this friend tells me that the guy I had dated on Saturday night came over by her on Sunday and let her drive his car for her 16th birthday, and she rolled it over. And I thought, what is that all about? He called me during the week, and he said, well, he couldn't come down and take me out on Saturday night because he didn't have a car. So he was going to send a friend down to pick me up, and we would meet at the dance later. So I said, okay. And by this time I had pieced that story together. So Dennis is who he sent down. And then we never went to the dance that he was at. That guy kept coming down every so often and calling, and nope, that wasn't going to work. So Dennis and I went out. And it just seemed like we got along really well, and he was very patient because he knew that I was finishing my junior year of high school. He had just graduated, and so I had another year of high school, and I had those 3 years of nursing school I was determined I was going to do. He was kind, and he was generous, and he was a hard worker. The young guys like to drink and smoke, and he didn't do any of that. And I liked that about him. What he liked about me? Golly, I don't know. Maybe I was a hard worker. I don't know. Our personalities just blended really well. So he had a great sense of humor. He liked to play. He liked to find out new things and adventure because, after all, he left working in the industrial engineering department at the West Bend Company to go farming. That was quite an adventure. That was a lot of money back then. Our wedding day, well, after waiting 5 years, it was like, hallelujah, we finally got here. But we got married in my church, and it was a little church. And it was overflowing with people. They filled the church, they filled the narthex, they filled the steps going up to church. Some of my aunts made a comment afterwards and said that it was the first wedding they had ever been to where the bride was smiling going up the aisle instead of down the aisle, because everybody smiles when they come down. But in those days, at least, everybody was very somber going up. Very serious. And so, but it's strange because I remember thinking to myself while the pastor was talking, I wonder what's going to take us apart. Now, isn't that an interesting thing to be thinking about on your wedding day? And I thought, I wonder if it's going to be a stroke or what. It was a very fleeting moment, but it stuck with me all those years. Anyway, it was a great day. When you get married, you have kids. Back then, we didn't, never gave it a thought. I have 3 children, Brian, Deborah, and Bob. Brian is my oldest. He works in a metal shop. He never liked school. The only class he ever liked was metals. He got to graduation, and he brought a note home that said, no yelling or screaming or whatever, whistling when they walk across the stage for graduation. I looked up at him and I said, I'm sorry, but I'm yelling. I said, I got you through this. He's got a good sense of humor, but he's not an aggressive kind of person. He doesn't go out and seek people. He's more shy and that. He's married. He has a daughter who's 29, and she's a dietitian down at Children's Hospital. So he did just fine for himself, even though there was many a Sunday in church I would pray, just help him grow up to be a responsible citizen. But then I prayed that for all the kids. And then my daughter, Deborah, is 2 years younger, and she was more outgoing, and she is very much into work for nonprofits. And she just is a very giving, almost to a fault, person who wants to help everybody. She's married to Charles, and she has 2 daughters. One is 28, and she works with geothermal energy. Don't ask me to explain it because she's explained it several times, but I still don't know it. And then she has a younger daughter who is 25, and she danced for several years, injured her back, and then last year in May had a bike accident in New York City, and she lost the hearing in her left ear. It was hard for her, 24, to have something like that happen. She's a dynamic young lady. And Bob came to live with us. I said, God knew we had somebody who was 16 and 18 in our family, and he knew that we needed somebody 17. So Bob came to live with us when he was 17. He needed a place to stay, and he had been friends with our kids. So one day my daughter called me at work and said that he had to move out from where he was living, and he had to get out that night. And so I happened to be going up to the high school to take him for driving that night because no one would sign for him to get his driver's license. At first I asked him what he was going to do, and he said, well, he thought he'd call maybe one of his friends and see if he could stay with them for a couple of nights until he figured it out. And I said, well, you want to stay with us? We can try it for a couple of weeks. So he came to live with us. And, well, he's been part of the family for 40 years. He's a very determined, very driven. Well, he graduated from lacrosse as a teacher in PE. And there were so many teachers and so few teaching jobs back then. So he went down to in the Phoenix area. They were having a job fair. So went, and he called me from down there, said he had been walking down the hall, and he was walking next to a guy who asked him what he taught. And he said it was PE. And he said, oh, my PE teacher just told me yesterday that he wasn't coming back, so he could come and interview. But he had to stay till Monday, he said. He called me and I said, stay till Monday. That's just fine. So he did, and he got the job, and he was pretty homesick the first year. And I said, well, isn't there somebody young there that works at the school too? And he said, no, they're all old. And I said, well, isn't there any student teachers? And he said, well, there is one in kindergarten. And a few weeks later, he called and said, Mom, we're going out tomorrow night. I said, great. So the night after they went out, I said, well, how did it go? And he said, we were pretty quiet. I said, that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. 2 years later, they got married, and they have 4 children. One is 27, and he's a youth pastor at a church, one of the large churches down there. Kaylee is 24 years old, and she recently got engaged, so we're looking forward to another wedding. And then there's the 20-year-old, and he's going to school to get his commercial pilot's license. And then they have a 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old is in Tennessee with them. I love being a mom. I love more being grandma. I married into the family who has had 91 annual family reunions. And my father-in-law started it at the encouragement of my mother-in-law, that once a year he needed to get his cousins together. And it's just continued year after year for 91 years. This year there were about 350 people, and there are some years it's well over 400. It's nice to see the kids being part of something much larger than themselves. There's an area of antiques, things the family came over from Germany with, lots of farm antiques. There's a schoolroom set up as it was back then. There's a kitchen set up the way it was back then. There's games. You can bring arts and crafts or candy goods, things that people might have had back then. There's a kuchen contest, and the kids mostly get into this. It's a tradition in a German kuchen. The traditional one is a yeast dough on the bottom with crumbles of lard and sugar and cinnamon on top. You make the kuchen. They choose at random 3 people out of the group that are there to judge the kuchens. And after they're judged, then they're auctioned off, live auctioned off. My daughter actually started that 25 years ago. And it brings in a little money for the games because there's bingo and there's all kinds of kids' games and things that are going on during the afternoon. And they also try to have some music. Well, they sell bratwurst and hamburgers. They sell beer. They sell soda. They sell ice cream. Every year you go, the excitement leading up to the day. That's what everybody plans their life around. After we were farming for 19 years, Dennis, he had to have a hip replacement. And the doctor wouldn't do the hip replacement until we sold the cows. So it's like, okay, that's what we have to do. So we sold the cows, and there was a period of time where he was in rehab, and then out of rehab he picked up little jobs. One day he was saying that he had a lump on the side of his jaw, and went to the doctor, and this doctor, and that doctor, and it ended up that it was salivary gland cancer, which is quite rare. At least that's what we were told. He had a surgery, and he had radiation treatments, and this is over about a year's period of time, and he was good for about 3-4 months, and then he started having pain there again. Finally got a biopsy that proved that it had come back. And the doctor told me, he said it's a very painful death, and they didn't have anything else to offer. So we spent 3 months that he had a feeding tube. I took off of work just to take care of him, and it indeed was a very painful death. He didn't get a lot of sleep. I didn't get much sleep at all, because every hour and a half I had to give him pain medicine. So it was dreadful because we felt like we had grown up together, and And it just like, it's your best buddy. So it was very difficult. It took me about 5 years to get over or get through that. Then I got lucky again at church and met another fellow. So we've had almost 10 years of fun. And Max is, I don't think he'd mind me saying that we met when we were both 70, and he had never been married before or had anything, and we just have had 10 years of good living. Some people never find one good guy, and I found two. So I feel very fortunate. I go down to Arizona for 3 months in the wintertime and have done it since my husband died. You know, you accumulate friends, and it's funny because it ends up this group of 5 of us for the last lots of years that I've been going down. We all have like histories. When we first met, it was through golf. Julie was from South Dakota, and one of the gals was from Iowa. I was from Wisconsin. Another one was a year-rounder in Arizona, and the other one was from Minnesota. And we were sitting on one of the patios talking because one of the gals had lost her husband the year before. And so I said to one of the other gals, we need to see where Julie's at. And so we got together after golf, and I started asking Julie how she was doing. And one of the other girls started talking, and she just took over and talked and talked and talked. Here she had lost her husband the same year I had lost mine, and she said she'd never had a therapy session like this where she could talk about how she felt. And it came to find out that there was a third gal in our group who also lost her husband the same year I did, and the other one had lost hers several years before. So immediately we liked golf, and we all had the same story to tell. So we became very close. All these years we did stuff together, and it was, some fun stuff. We went to Hawaii. So, what are we going to do? Well, we need to take a ride of some kind out into the ocean and see whales. So one of the gals got it all set up. We arrive and find out we're in a very large rubber raft. And we're like, well, we must be going out to meet a bigger boat. That must be why. And we go out and we go out and we go out, and we're talking with the 2 young people that are doing the guide. No, this is the boat. You gotta be kidding. So we went out there. We were like 2-3 miles out, and the whales are going like crazy. And these young pairs said, we've never had old people on here before. Oh, for goodness sakes, this is a little out of our league. But oddly enough, we did not get sick, but one of the young people did. Well, I've changed. I think I've become more sure of myself. Certainly not as shy as I was growing up. I love adventure. I love to see new places. I've been over to Europe probably 7 times, just learning new things. Last year I was in Croatia, where you could see the bullet holes in the houses, and there wasn't anybody living there. And I thought, what happened to those people? Where are they now? So it's that travel makes things personal. What is my passion? To see people fulfill their hopes, see people treated well. I think that's the things that make me most happy. I think I look up to my children. I know their struggles, and I know their coping strategies that I never had that when I was their age. They amaze me. Greatest joys. Well, my greatest joy was getting married. Oh, goodness, that was a great day. But having my children, particularly seeing Bob accomplish what he has in life. He has been named National Coach of the Year Oh, my little great-granddaughter. She is just a little sweetheart. I love flowers. Ice cream. Oh, when I was by myself, that Culver's would just pull me in, and that would be supper. Oh, my goodness. But I think the biggest thing is seeing all three of the kids have solid, good, kind, caring personalities. And my grandkids are just solid people. I think that's my greatest joy. I'm trying to keep my head around my situation right now. It overwhelms me some days, and other days whatever will be, will be. A few months ago, I was golfing and doing all the regular active stuff I do, and doctor called and said that my blood work, some of it was a little bit low. I should wait a couple weeks and have it redone. So I did, and he called and said it had gone a little lower. I needed to see a hematology oncologist. So I did that, and he said the biopsy came back that I had something called myelodysplastic syndrome. And he explained that it was a form of leukemia. And in the process of our conversation, I asked what my longevity was. And he said less than a year. That's like getting hit in the head. And what in the world, less than a year? The doctor convinced me to take a round of chemo. After about a week and a half after that chemo, I got so sick. And the day that we were figuring out what was the next step, he suggested I take a half dose of chemo. And I said, no. I said I was too sick to get through this one, that my body would never take even a half round, I didn't think. I asked him what my longevity was if I did a half round. And he said, well, maybe 4 months. And I said, what if I do nothing? He said, well, you might have 4 months. I thought, what is the point of going through all that for what? Maybe a couple weeks? So hospice is where I am. And they're very, very, very nice here, very kind. Food is good. They give you ice cream. I leave everything up to God. That's just how I live. What am I going to do? Argue with it or be mad about it? Yeah, I'd like to be mad because, I'm not afraid of dying, but I love living. One of my philosophies, I guess you would say, would be to not worry about the future. It's out of my hands. Deal with today the best you can. And everything kind of falls into place. When I was at work, my staff would say, I don't know if I can do this or whatever. And I said, I need that T-shirt that says, get her done. Just do it. I was like, because you spend all this time wondering if you can or you can't. You could have had it done by then. I'm not afraid of failure. That's what makes life interesting, is doing something different. And I would have never said yes to going to farm back then if I was afraid we were going to fail. I would have never started a cardiac and pulmonary rehab program that nobody knew anything about. If I would have been afraid of failing with that program, that would have never happened. Life lessons that I can share are sticking to your values, honesty and integrity, and making up your own mind about things. Believe in yourself. There is a place for you. You just need to find it. What I hope for the world is peace, kindness, and love, so we can all get along, no matter what we look like, no matter what we believe. If we were all the same, wouldn't that be boring? Yeah, so let's get to know people who think different, or not even think different, but just, are a little quirky. We're all a little quirky, yeah. I just think I've had a good life.